to the third episode of Witty CFB with your host Rob Sheply here. And for this week's episode, we're going to talk about the Penn State Nittany Lions. And for those who don't know, I'm right outside of I'm right in Center City, Philadelphia. So there's always a lot of talk about Penn State, about the expectations. It's such a historical program, such a great place to go see a game. I was there for the Michigan game where unfortunately it just did not go Penn State's way this year. But I think the one thing that a lot of fans are kind of asking themselves are, when is Penn State going to take that next step to the national championship? And I think it is worth bringing that up, since I think this year 2024, I believe it's James Franklin's 11th season going into Penn State, and it just kind of seems like there's the same narrative of Penn State getting to nine or 10 wins, then falling, and then kind of just falling short, and then we just sort of just talk about them again next year. So with that said, I think there are a couple things that they're going to have to do this year in order to get to a national championship. Now, do I think they can win a national title? I think, at least in my opinion, more realistically speaking, I would like to see them at least make the playoff. Possibly win the conference championship. Now, I mean, obviously with the Big Ten moving towards, there's no more divisions anymore within the conference, so you pretty much have to place within the top two to really get in. So the odds are certainly stacked there. But in terms of actual 2024 Penn State, where do they go in terms of making the playoff and possibly making a national championship run? To me, there are two things that really kind of stand out in terms of them making the next step. To me, first, I think the offense just has to step up. There's no way around it. I just watched a bunch of games last year where, to me, the offense kind of felt lackluster. I think to me, it just felt too conservative. I think it's the easiest kind of way to sort of kind of piece it together. Now, when I look at Penn State's schedule from last year, I mean, yes, they did have a nice win versus Iowa, 31-0. They beat UMass. They actually hung pretty tough October 21st against Ohio State. They beat Maryland. They beat Rutgers, Michigan State, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes down to it, when you think about the Ohio State game, Penn State had a lot of chances in that game to take the lead, but ultimately what it came down to was they just couldn't capitalize on those certain situations in order to kind of take the next step. And Drew Allar, he's an incredible talent. No way around that. The guy's a stud. He is a guy that you watch on film and you say to yourself, hey, I would want this kid to be my starter too. I want this kid on my team. I wouldn't want him to transfer. But at this point in the game, if you expect Penn State to really take the next step, we got to see more out of them. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying I think we just need to find some more ways to kind of take some more chances down the field. And, I think he's got to let it rip a little bit. Now, granted, obviously, putting up 41 against Northwestern or 63 versus UMass is great. But, I want to see more of that explosiveness against the Ohio States, against the Michigans, against the Oregons when they come into town. So, with that said, obviously, it's certainly possible that Penn State might have another couple runners with 1,000-yard rushing seasons, and that's great. I definitely think they need that sort of compliment in order to kind of take the pressure off of them. But at the same time, it's only gonna work so much in terms of having that sort of leg to lean on. Now, granted, do I think that the protection could have been better at some points for Allar? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll be the first one to mention that. Hey, the protection could have been this, the protection could have been that. But at the end of the day, if you really look at his stats, I mean, completion percentage of 59.9, round up to 60, 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So I mean, it's not like this guy's like a turnover machine or anything. He actually reminds me a lot of Graham Mertz. And now that I'm thinking about it, because when I think about Graham Mertz, I think about his time I think about him at the very beginning of his career in Wisconsin, where he's kind of under the radar. and nobody really talked about it. But now he kind of had an explosive year, didn't really turn the ball over too much, and had a nice 1-2 combo in the backfield where he didn't have to do too much. Now the Tide's kind of I think what's really different about those two is Drew Allar. When he got recruited in, he was always kind of the guy where, Graham Mertz, yes, he's a 4-year starter, but he really had to kind of earn his spot, where Drew Allar was more of kind of the, we knew he was going to start, it was just kind of a matter of when sort of thing. And in order for really to kind of see that next level, I think one, you really just need to build on it, but two, I definitely just want to see more chances down the field. I think we just can't see, I just want to see some more flashy plays. I want to see some more excitement, a little bit less conservativeness, and I just think it's going to get to a point where I think the athletic office and the president and the board of directors are going to have to sit there and say to themselves, do I think James Franklin can win me a national championship? Because at this point, 11 seasons in, and I love James Franklin, that guy's a stud. He's I can only say great things about him, but there's going to come a point in time where Penn State is going to have to ask themselves, can they win a national championship with this guy? And quite frankly, I don't really know the answer to that. But also at the same time, we could also sit here and speculate just as much that maybe James Franklin's just content with, maybe they're just he's good being there. Maybe he's kind of grandfathered in. Obviously, they had Joe Pa for so many years too. So Penn State is that type of program where they are loyal to their coaching staff and everything like that. But at the same time too, it's just a different generation now. It's a different era where you really have to invest more money in the facilities, in your assistants, and everything, because everything's pretty much Russian roulette every year now, where you really have no idea what your roster is going to be year after year. So with that said, we obviously kind of talked about Drew Allar a little bit. I think obviously they got to be aggressive a little bit more, and we'll just take a quick glance real quick at their 2024 schedule, just to kind of get an idea of how realistic it. I think it. From what I took a brief glance at this before this episode, and I saw about 10 wins on the schedule, but I really think you need to kind of find a way to get to 11. But let's take a quick look why we got it on here. So I pull up the schedule. So kind of like last year just like last year, they had their blue and white game. Okay. August 31st at West Virginia. To me, that should be a win. Next week, you are home versus Bowling Green. You're 2-0. Kent State at home, 3-0. Versus Illinois, 4-0. Now, granted, Illinois has gotten a little better, and Brett Bielema is definitely kind of on the ropes a little bit. But that's a game you got to win. I don't care if you're home or away or what. To me, starting off Illinois should be a nice little two. I'll pretty much call it a tune-up. Call for what it is. It's a tune-up game. So Illinois 4-0, UCLA 5-0. I think this is where it gets a little dicey, because if you look at these next 3 games, they have at USC, at Wisconsin, but they're home versus Ohio State. Now, depending on who you talk to, Lincoln Riley is one of the best college coaches in the country. Now, I am not so much, on that bandwagon. I admire what they're doing over there. I think, Lincoln has done a hell of a job, but at the same time, until they get that defense figured out, we're not going to be talking about them in the Big Ten championship and in the playoff and all of that too. So, if you ask me today what I think is going to happen, I think they're going to find a way to beat USC. I think that game's going to come down to who makes less mistakes. Because if Drew comes out pretty hot against Illinois and Kent State, and the rushing attack was as good as last year, I don't see any issue with Penn State being able to have a shootout with USC. So let's say for argument's sake, let's give them the win here. Now Wisconsin, I think they're going to be one of the most underrated programs in the entire country. You heard that right here in May 2024, even 3 months out for the year. So I'm telling you, Luke Fickell is building something special there. He did the same thing at Cincinnati, and he's doing the same thing there. Now, obviously, ever since Paul Christ left and all that, it was nobody's really kind of talked about them in a while. But I think this could be one of Wisconsin's probably best years that they're gonna have in a long time, and I think a lot of fans definitely need to kind of keep an eye on them, because I'm telling you, they're building something special there, and Luke Fickell's one hell of a coach. And the Ohio State, obviously that could be that could be the difference between making the playoff versus not making the playoff, especially when you think to themselves, because a lot of people, even myself last year, when we were looking at Penn State last year, I said to myself, man, this schedule looks really good until they get beat by Michigan, and then they miss the playoff, which is pretty much exactly what happened. But I think what's different about this year compared to last year is I think there are some way higher quality opponents for 2024 compared to 2023. I think Drew's going to be a little bit mature. I think the rushing attack's going to be there. And, to me, I think it's going to be a different atmosphere, especially being at Beaver Stadium as opposed to Ohio State. I think they're going to want a redemption story, and I'm really hoping to somehow see a win there. But being objective, let's just say worst case scenario, they eat that game, right? And then so you go next week, you beat Washington at home. Then you go to Purdue and you win Purdue. Then you go to Minnesota and you beat Minnesota. And then you finish off the season at Maryland, who maybe not as much as Wisconsin, but I'm telling you, Maryland and Maryland's a special program with Phil Loxley over there. I'm telling you, don't be surprised if 3 to 5 seasons from now, if he's not too loyal to Maryland, I would not be surprised if you see his name being discussed with a big Power 5 job. Now, I get Maryland's not in the same boat as the Michigans and the Ohio States and all that, but I'm telling you, Maryland's a respectable program. And the one thing that I will say about Maryland is they're always in a bowl game. More often than not, they're in a bowl game. They're consistent, and I'm telling you, they're a tough, gritty team. Which, as someone who's been following the Big Ten, especially a lot more in anticipation of going to the Penn State Michigan game, it definitely caught my attention. Yeah, so there you have it. Here it looks like as far as I can see here, I see I would see absolute worst, maybe 10-2, assuming they drop one of those upset games. Maybe they do lose a heartbreaker to Wisconsin or USC or Maryland, and maybe they lose. And assuming you lose to Ohio State and then you lose to one of those two, 10-2, or absolute best, you take care of business, go through the whole way, and be 11-1. And with 11-1, you should be able to make the playoff. So with that said, as I'm looking at this right now, I would strongly anticipate them being in the playoff, but obviously with there only being 12 teams in the playoff this year, we're kind of all rolling the dice in terms of what we actually think could or couldn't happen.